Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different, and honestly, pretty fascinating. We're taking a deep dive into the unseen, literally, going from quantum fields all the way to the Holy Spirit. We're going to explore two radically different frameworks for making sense of invisible realities, the mysterious mathematical laws of quantum physics and the deep relational theology of the Christian faith. So whether we're talking about the bizarre behavior of subatomic particles or the nature of a divine being, we're looking at how sources from both science and theology describe the things we simply cannot see.
Think about this for a second. What truly governs the unseen world? It's genuinely one of the biggest questions humanity can ask. Are the hidden foundations of our reality ultimately driven by cold, impersonal mathematical equations? Or is there a deeply personal presence behind it all? Let's dive right into this by first looking at the scientific side of the unseen.
To get a grip on the scientific view, we really have to start with quantum mechanics. This is basically the foundational rulebook for the universe's absolute smallest building blocks. We're talking about things like electrons and photons. But as you zoom into this level, things get incredibly weird. Particles don't act like solid objects anymore. Instead, as physicists like Brian Cox point out, particles essentially hop from place to place based purely on probability. We have to describe them using these abstract mathematical equations called wave functions, which basically just calculate the likelihood that a particle might appear in a specific spot.
There is a jarring, massive contrast between how you and I experience the everyday world and how the quantum world actually works. Classical physics, the physics of Isaac Newton, describes this predictable, clockwork universe. It's a deterministic machine where objects are local and solid. But quantum physics? It completely shatters that whole assumption. The quantum realm is probabilistic, it's non-local, and is defined by shifting relationships and waves of potential. Reality, at its most fundamental physical level, isn't made of solid things at all. It's made of unresolved potentials.
And because this shift is so extreme, it totally breaks human intuition. So, hey, if this makes your head spin, you are definitely not alone. As the Nobel laureate Richard Feynman famously pointed out, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. Our human brains just aren't wired to naturally grasp a universe where solid objects don't actually behave like solid objects until someone measures them.
Okay, so what are the specific, mind-bending rules of this realm? Well, first, you have superposition. That's where a particle exists in multiple states or places all at once, right up until a measurement literally forces it to choose a location. Then there's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That means you can only know a particle's position or its momentum precisely, never both at the same time. And finally, you've got entanglement, where two particles become part of a single, shared system. These underlying mechanics operate as this massive, intricate system of highly complex, yet entirely impersonal forces.
And entanglement is honestly the strangest rule of all. If you measure one entangled particle, its partner instantly takes the corresponding state. And get this, that happens even if they are billions of miles apart. This complete lack of physical separation deeply troubled Albert Einstein. He famously and kind of hilariously dismissed it as spooky action at a distance. He just couldn't accept that the universe allowed for this instant connection without some hidden, pre-programmed instructions. Yet modern experiments prove this non-local, completely impersonal mathematical connection is a fundamental feature of our universe.
So, science describes the unseen foundation of the physical universe as this giant web of impersonal forces and mathematical probabilities. But as we pivot our explainer to look at the religious sources, we find that Christian theology takes a radically different approach to the unseen. Instead of an impersonal quantum universe, Christianity proposes a reality that is fundamentally relational.
To really understand this, we need to establish the absolute baseline of Christian theology, which is the concept of the Trinity. Christians believe God is an uncreated personal being, not a force, not a blind cosmic energy, and definitely not a wave function. The doctrine of the Trinity asserts that there is one God who exists eternally as three distinct, fully divine persons: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the difference between an impersonal power and a personal being, especially when it comes to the Holy Spirit. An impersonal power, like electricity or gravity, is blind, right? It can be wielded, sure, but it is completely unaware. A personal being, on the other hand, has a mind. It speaks, it loves, and it can actually experience grief. Throughout history, some groups have argued that the Holy Spirit is really just a spiritual version of electricity, like an active force or energy wielded by God. And this brings us to a fascinating theological debate. We're going to impartially analyze the Holy Spirit's role as a person by examining the key biblical arguments theologians use to defend this idea. The primary argument in these source texts is that the Bible consistently describes the Spirit not as an act of energy, but as a distinct personal being with a conscious mind and a will.
Let's kick things off with the words of Jesus in the Gospel of John. He tells his disciples that it's actually to their advantage that he leaves, so the Helper will come. Theologically speaking, replacing the physical, deeply relational presence of Jesus with some blind, impersonal energy just wouldn't logically comfort a group of grieving disciples. Plus, in the original Greek text, Jesus refers to the Spirit as another helper, using the word allos. That specifically implies another of the exact same kind. So, just as Jesus is a personal guide, the sources argue the Spirit is promised to be a personal God too.
We see this clearly when we look at the specific actions attributed to the Spirit. According to John chapter 16, the Holy Spirit convicts the world of sin, guides believers into truth, hears, speaks, and glorifies Jesus. The theological argument here is pretty straightforward. You have to be a person to do these things. An impersonal force doesn't hear a message and then decide to speak it, nor does it actively guide someone into moral truth. These are the behaviors of a conscious agent.
We actually see this again in Luke 12:12. Jesus promises that the Holy Spirit will teach believers what to say during moments of intense persecution. Now, while an impersonal force might give someone physical strength, think of the biblical story of Samson pushing down those pillars, only a conscious person with a mind can actively teach you specific information and formulate words for you during a high-pressure interrogation. Simply put, teaching requires a teacher.
Moving over to Romans chapter 8, the text explicitly states that the Spirit intercedes in prayer for believers, and, this is key, that the Spirit has a mind. The sources point out that having a mind is a defining hallmark of personal identity. I mean, think about it. Trees don't pray. Electricity doesn't intercede for anyone. Only persons possess minds and the actual capacity to advocate for others.
Now think back to those laws of physics we discussed earlier. You can resist a force, like gravity, say by building an airplane and flying, but you cannot grieve gravity. You can't hurt gravity's feelings or let it down. Only a personal being can experience the deep emotional pain of grief.
Which makes this verse from Ephesians 4 deeply significant to the theological argument. It explicitly commands believers not to grieve the Holy Spirit, and the text surrounds this command with warnings against lying, anger, and disunity. The clear implication from the source material is that treating others poorly brings actual emotional grief to the Spirit. That underscores a deep relational bond and an emotional capacity that a mechanical, impersonal reaction simply cannot possess.
Let's synthesize just a few more proof points that highlight a divine will and voice. In the book of Acts, Peter declares that a man named Ananias lied directly to the Holy Spirit. You can lie about a camera or a rock, but you can only lie to a person. Furthermore, 1 Corinthians states the Spirit distributes spiritual gifts as he wills. The Spirit also speaks using first-person pronouns, saying things like, "set apart for me," and is even described as expressing love. A will, a first-person voice, and the capacity to love. These are all fundamental arguments for personhood. So, what should you take away from all this? Well, if we look at the theological conclusion presented in these sources, the deepest layer of reality is fundamentally relational, not just mathematical. In this framework, the Holy Spirit isn't some impersonal power, like a spiritual utility you just plug into. Instead, the text presents a divine person meant to be intimately known and interacted with. Man, we have covered some incredible ground today. We started with the bizarre, totally impersonal probabilities of quantum mechanics, where particles act like waves and seem to communicate instantaneously across the cosmos. And then we explored the complex theology of the Christian Trinity, examining the specific biblical arguments for a deeply personal, unseen spirit that loves, wills, and teaches. So I'm going to leave you with this one provocative thought. Whether it's those mind-bending mathematical mysteries or the relational depths of theology, how much of the reality that truly governs our lives is hiding just out of sight? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.